David Fetter, Executive Editor Technical for Prepared Foods, and welcome to a Prepared Foods special presentation on trends in flavor fusion in new product development. Joining us today is Professor Hinnerk Von Bargen of the Culinary Institute of America, the other CIA, down in San Antonio, and he's also a regular contributor to Prepared Foods. Hi, Hinnerk. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, David. Thank you so much for having me. It's truly a pleasure to be here. I like this concept very much. I look forward to all the things we can talk about today.
And we will. But before we dive into how fusion cuisine currently is changing the whole world of culinary creations, I gotta say, you and I came up as chefs in the 80s at the beginnings of the fusion movement, and we've spoken before about what it meant then. What I wanted to ask, from you is, since you're still in the mix and in the trenches, as we kick off 2023, what would you tell someone today who asks you what is fusion cuisine?
Yeah, it's a very good question. From my perspective, fusion cuisine is kind of like a creative, artistic approach in designing new dishes. And what we do there, we are crossing not only culinary borders, we're also crossing geopolitical borders, ethnic borders. And it's not just about combining different cuisines, it often also goes into combining techniques of actually within the same cuisine sometimes. So it's basically a creative approach to getting up new dishes which haven't been there before, and therein sometimes lies because it's appreciated by many, but it's also not appreciated by just as many. So, but I enjoy fusion very much.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that you're right. That is something that we didn't have to worry about in the 80s. Was when you said geopolitical boundaries, you're right. It's so easy, to offend, and if you mix the wrong two cultures. So that's great. So let's look at the positive side. What would you say are the keys to success in executing today's fusion flavors?
I think the biggest key to success actually is that you understand all cuisines involved, and all techniques involved in a new dish. If you want to incorporate Chinese flavors into German cuisine, which has been done in the past, but if you only understand one of the two cuisines and have no idea on how to use the ingredients, how to properly execute the techniques, you're destined to fail. So we have to understand all components involved in an effort to maintain the food's integrity. Making a schnitzel dipped in soy sauce just is not good. So there's better things we can do, right? It's also important that we understand that each dish, a complete dish, is based on a has-need relationship. That means the main item provides a crunch, so now we need to counteract with something soft, perhaps. And a good sample there is, if we look at, for example, a burger, which is inherently soft, we love French fries for that. Whereas if we have a fried chicken, which is inherently crispy, yes, some might like fries, but the majority prefers a good mashed potato. And here we go. How about now doing this a cool wasabi mashed potatoes? All of a sudden, whoa, the extra nosiness gives a cool additional thing, and perhaps combine this with a teriyaki dipping sauce. And here we are with some quite successful fusion cuisine. So it's about a dish has something, and it provides something else. Another thing to be successful is not to be stifled by perceived authenticity. My wife owns a restaurant, and she would describe her cuisine as a Pan-Asian comfort food. And her goal is never authenticity. Her goal is integrity, which means she has a steamed bun filled with a fried chicken and a teriyaki glaze. One of the most popular dishes in the room. So it's a Taiwanese style steamed bun with a fried chicken with a teriyaki glaze, or with a Thai flavored shrimp. So of course, once in a while, the self-appointed authenticity police, mostly from Yelp, comes in and leave the comments about this. So a good sample also, what I've done once is where I made tortillas, and I made them actually out of equal parts of bread flour and masa harina, which is two complete, vast, different tortillas, but I made a cool, confused tortilla, if you will. And I showed this to a very dear friend of mine, Chef Ileana de la Vega from Austin, who recently was awarded a James Beard Award. And she was just terrified by the idea of messing around with her holy tortillas. And the reaction was, Hinnerk, this is terrible. You can't do that.
Yeah, you're right. It's either corn or flour. Now, I don't know if you know this, but about 2-3 weeks ago, I think it was, Trader Joe's started to sell a half masa harina, half flour tortilla.
Yeah, yeah,
So
I've seen this a while
catching.
ago. Also here in the local HGB, I've seen this too. And I couldn't help it and take a picture and send it to her. I said, I might have started something here. Who knows?
Yeah, well, just real quick, since you mentioned El Naranjo and her restaurant in Austin, what's your wife's restaurant in San Antonio?
Her name is Ming's. So the overall parent company is called Ming's Thing, and so she it's called Ming's. And as I said, it's Pan Asian comfort food. She focuses mainly on Taiwanese steamed buns, or bao buns as they're known these days. Right. You find them in Momofuku a lot, so she's doing something like that. And I'm happy to report she's often compared to the ones in Momofuku. So, and then she's doing noodle bowls. She's doing what you might call a ramen, but it's actually either the Thai-inspired version, the Chinese-inspired version, and something what's called like a dry noodle bowls, which is you find in Singapore, which is inherently fusion cuisine and cross-cultural, what they would call a banh mian, which means mixed noodles.
Huh. Okay. So, all right. So we're talking about that fine line between fusion and confusion here. What would be the pitfalls you could point out in, when a research chef is working on bringing these seemingly disparate flavor notes or techniques together? Where would the epic fails occur?
Yeah, the biggest one is, again, a lack of understanding of culinary cultures and techniques. Also, the cultural background to understand why things are done in a certain way, in a certain cuisine, will truly help to be successful. And of course, like a disregard of best culinary principles. If you have the typical breaded pork cutlet, the schnitzel, pan fry it or deep fry it like they do in Japan. It's good. Don't stir fry it. And so many chefs, we all are artists. We have an artistic key to what we're doing. And many of us like to put themselves out there on the plate. And that sometimes takes over the personal desire to be different, to look at me, what I can do. We have seen this a lot when it was really hot, what we call molecular gastronomy or postmodern cuisine, where many things have been done just look at me, what I can do. Isn't that cool? Where the gustatory pleasure wasn't even in the foreground. It was, look at me, how avant-garde can I be?
Can you please walk us through some types of fusion cuisine that are currently trending that you've noticed?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few. When we cross-utilize ingredients and or flavors, for example, the by now really famous Bulgogian kimchi tacos, right? It was viewed as revolutionary at the time. Now it's become quite normal. We have, based on the Indian samosas, a panini has been made with a very similar filling. So based on potatoes, spiced potatoes and peas and a lot of spices in there, and make it either as a grilled toast or a grilled cheese with potatoes in there. You find similar things all over India. If you look about the aloo prata, where basically a flaky bread has been made with a potato filling, and this has just been taken to the next level, if you will, and turned this into a panini, and it's quite nice.
I can see that one. I can actually see that one becoming a popular item translating to a frozen,
Oh, absolutely.
snack or
Absolutely.
something really well, and then
Oh, yes.
making it into onto shelves everywhere. That's a good idea.
Yeah, when you look at many Indian stores, samosas, frozen samosas are a staple. So this can be easily manufactured, could be easily pre-pressed to just reheat in the oven. And of course, with the current trend of plant forward, it's certainly going to be a very popular one. Um, we can take the traditional BLT and normally serve between regular white bread and make it a grilled cheese BLT, make it a panini BLT panini in this direction. And of course, we can also cross-use techniques. My wife in her restaurant, she's doing one thing actually where she takes the pork belly and she cures it like a bacon. It's about a week-long process where she dry cures it, lets it hang to dry for a couple of days, but then it doesn't cold smoke, it smokes it more like a barbecue. So it's a long smoking process for about 4 hours at a relatively low temperature, which really softens the pork belly. But yeah, these TX, and then, sorry, Dave, I have to mention this. The pastrami, but smoked like a Texas brisket. We actually recently made it so where we actually brine the brisket like it would pastrami, would then dry it for another day, roll it in the spice mix, and then basically smoke it for a good 12 hours at about 240, give or take. And we actually just recently did this for, it was a project from my garde manger class for our graduation, and it was exceedingly popular. And then we actually served it on a rye bread with some red cabbage slaw. You know what? People loved it.
Oh no, it does sound really good, really good. So, well, okay. So the U.S. is, of course, not the only global melting pot. Many countries have become cultural crossroads over the years. We mentioned Singapore, and I was wondering, what are some examples of cuisines that have transitioned from fusion to mainstream, so much so that they're now considered authentic?
Kind of, when does the dish become authentic? Think about the famous Japanese tonkatsu or the torikatsu, the breaded pork cutlet, which was introduced to Japan. The idea of breading and frying something was introduced to Japan by Germans who lived there. The thing is that the Japanese didn't have a bread culture to know of, so they had to come up with their own panko breadcrumbs for which they actually produce the bread.
Panko, which we think of as traditional Japanese, isn't.
No, it's not. It's not. It is a relative novelty, considering how far back Japanese culinary culture is going, and that's a relative novelty. Yeah. Right? Or think about the Japanese beef curry is the most popular lunch dish in Japan and Korea, which is fundamentally a beef stew thickened with a curry roux, introduced by British cooks to Japan who missed the flavors from India but had no idea how to make these things. So most popular lunches. Or think about one of my favorite breakfasts in Singapore, a culinary crossroad like no one else, is the kaya, which is actually a grilled toast filled with butter and a coconut jam. And then that's dipped into a mixture of a coddled egg, a very soft cooked egg mixed with dark soy sauce and pepper. If you've never had it, you need to go there. It's just
wow. No, it sounds good.
It is phenomenal. It's based on an old British thing where they would use a coddled egg and dip their toast point in this coddled egg mixed with Worcestershire and Tabasco.
Right.
So it is. There's restaurant chains all over Singapore who focus just on that. The rest is history. The rest is history. So certainly coming on, the most popular street food in Germany would be doner kebab, which was introduced by Turkish immigrants. But in Germany, the doner kebab comes in a flatbread together with, guess what, a green cabbage slaw.
I remember working in Hamburg, and there would be a doner kebab, stall like every 100 feet.
Yeah, and I remember when I was living in China, and all of a sudden I saw the sign there, and I saw them doing doner kebab, and my Chinese was very limited, and I asked my girlfriend, now wife, hey, does it mean Germany? Yeah, that's a German specialty. No, not quite. But that's how far we've come. But I've seen if we move on to other cultures where it's very common, like even more in East Asia, the banh mi is just cross-cultural itself.
Right,
The
right.
Vietnamese banh mi. And what I've seen there, actually, they filled on one street stand I've seen where they filled a banh mi with a chicken shawarma.
Oh, okay.
And it
So,
was,
but
it
you're right.
was,
So now you've got, the banh mi, which was from the French influence with the
yeah,
baguette, and then now they're filling it with chicken shawarma, which is your Middle East, but
yeah,
which came by way of India originally. And
yes.
wow.
And that was, but still, it was distinctly Vietnamese because they still had the nuoc mam dressing, they still had
Right.
the carrots and vegetables in there. It was actually delicious. Or so many other things. If you talk about Afghani cuisine, which we all don't know much about, right? But cuisine in Afghanistan, a true crossroad between Iranian cuisine and Indian cuisine, what's called a samosa in Indian cuisine, they call sambusa, which is something very similar. Or if you look at the Afghani manti, or something they call the mantu, which is very similar to like a Turkish style ravioli. Or if you go to Korea, they call this mandu. Or if you go to China, they call it pot sticker.
Huh,
But all these
wow.
things, all these cultures have interacted extensively. If we think about Malaysian cuisine, which is also another culinary crossroad, and a common technique there is what's called a rempa, or common ingredient, which is somewhat comparable to a Thai curry paste. It's just that a rempa is much more diverse, much more different versions, but it's fundamentally based on pureed shallots or pounded shallots into a very fine paste, often with candle nuts, which act as a thickener, lots of other spices in there. And this shallot or the spice paste is then oftentimes cooked for quite a while at the beginning before the remaining ingredients are added. One of my favorite dishes based on this, it's called beef rendang, where actually it's a dry beef curry for which this rempa is cooked first until it's really, really aromatic. For about half an hour to 45 minutes, beef is added, coconut is added, and then it's cooked down until all the ingredients are dried down again. And Indian cuisine has something very similar, but they cook the onions first and then puree them. So all these cultures interacted with each other, and they took aspects of each other's cuisine, and which is now a very much authentic thing. Well, think about enchilada suiza in Mexican cuisine, with a Swiss cheese, or just simple Tex-Mex or Cali-Mex, which is two vastly different approaches, but it's pretty authentic now.
Right. Yeah, you're right. There's Tex-Mex is considered its very own cuisine, in and of itself. It's okay. So let's look even further into the future. I guess you could say, what culinary fusions do you think could happen that have yet to happen, that haven't been explored but should be? Basically, I'm thinking of cuisines that could merge due to commonalities they have but haven't been tried.
Yeah.
So
I think a big one right there, what hasn't tried yet, is Central African cuisine. We have never talked much about them. North Africa, the cuisines of the Maghreb, all these, yeah, we know them. We know our couscous. We all know these things. South African cuisine, heavily influenced by Dutch, British, and colonial cuisine. Yeah, Central Africa, we talk West Africa, or if you look at East Africa, Ethiopian cuisine is also a lot strong Indian influence with all the spices in there. But something I foresee coming is, I don't know if you've heard about this very much, is typical Ghanaian or Nigerian fufu, which is basically a mixture of plantains and local roots or starchy roots, cassava, sometimes potatoes, sometimes yucca roots, pounded into a puree and then cooked into a very gooey ball. And that's their staple. And it's normally eaten by hand because it's very, very chewy. It's gained popularity. So I can foresee fufu fritters for convenience reason, especially for pre-prepped. I can see there is, and I've tried it once, it's actually a very similar to Korean or fermented soybean paste, or call it miso paste. It's a fermented paste from locust beans, and they call this dawa dawa. You might have heard about this in Ghana. And it's so I can see this. I can see that taken off. I talked to a Nigerian chef, and she said, yeah, she grew up with this. It's just a lot of work to make, and it gives you a strong umami flavor. And these days, many chefs are using more like chicken powder because it's just more convenient, right? But there's a growing movement back to this. But other cuisines which haven't also been tried yet to merge would be Nordic cuisines. Think about Scandinavian, Norwegian, Swedish cuisine, and there's a couple of cool things we can do. A gravlax tempura hasn't been done very much, so which I've tried, and it's actually really cool. You just have to watch out if you take a typical cured salmon and you cook it, it ends up tasting like canned salmon. It's really not good. So what you have to do there, you take the gravlax, you freeze it, dip it in the cool tempura batter, deep fry that the salmon doesn't cook. It's basically only defrosted and deep frying. I can foresee these things coming. It's also, again, we always look for the next big thing, the next new thing. And Nordic cuisines have been kind of, yeah, have gotten some notoriety. There's quite a few notable restaurants in that region. But
it's that is, no, I was going to say it's fascinating because I would tie that into Iceland is having a huge boom right now in tourism. I mean, just for the past 2-3 years, maybe it was one of the safe places you could go during COVID or what, I don't know. But everybody I know has been going to Iceland. And, you know, I don't know how far something like lutefisk could travel, you know, in the US. But
yeah, lutefisk, yeah, also very popular in Sweden.
Yeah, fermented shark. You know,
the Greenland shark. I'm not so sure because now we're talking about very, very distinct hardcore flavors. Avant-gardistic fusion for those. What I can see there, talking about this, the other Chinese fermented tofus, which are significantly milder, but still give you a similar umami effect, so that they will become a big part in fusion cuisines. I can see that because they give you a good vegan umami with a relative decent health halo. But these very, or like Southeast Asian durian, I don't think that become a mainstream anytime soon.
But you know, something you said earlier about, you know, the taking, you know, familiar ingredients and such, and bringing them into a fusion kind of reminds me of something that I'd mentioned about, oh gosh, it was well more than 40 years ago when Dallas, where I'm from, got its first Thai restaurant, and I was asked to write about a few years later, write about what I thought, you know, if Thai food would take off. And I said, you know, that I thought it would, because it combined the familiar and the unfamiliar. And, you know, if you think of a satay sauce, it's getting down to basics, it's peanut butter and jelly. And you can't go wrong with that, you know, with Americans. And then you've got cilantro, which had that familiarity from Mexican cuisine that in Texas we were familiar with. And, you know, sure enough, you look today and everybody has just a dozen Thai restaurants in every small city and 100 in every big city. So you do need that familiar and an unfamiliar way to carry a good fusion concept across.
Yes, well, absolutely. Yeah, the familiarity wrapped in a new concept. That reminds me of, in one class, actually also a while ago, we asked the students to take some childhood memories and transform them into a new dish, which is also fusion, if you will. And there was one team, and they actually made a PBJ salad.
Okay.
For which they took a relative tender green, so they made a roasted peanut butter dressing, and they took a relative tender green and they tossed in some dried, rehydrated cranberries and currants, and tossed the whole thing with some brioche to top off, and had like a currant jelly reduction drizzled all over it. You know what? That was tasty. And that's also like fusion. So I can see these things salad. to wrap things. And whenever I do the salad in class or so, it actually becomes very popular also among children, because Familiarity. Children, it's very hard to convince children to eat a salad. Make it familiar, give it something cool that they actually want to try it. So yeah, that's also a type of fusion. I can see that.
Yeah, so listen, I've run us out of time. I'm sorry, but we'd definitely like to have you back again. I
Oh, I'd
want to
love to.
thank you. Thanks. I want to thank you for sharing your insights into culinary fusion, showing us the topic through the lens of a master research chef and teacher. I want to thank our audience members for joining us. I hope that you like this look at the studied merging of global flavors as much as I did. I'm David Fetter, Executive Editor Technical for Prepared Foods Media, and this was a talk with Professor Hinnerk Von Bargen of the Culinary Institute of America. Be sure to check out our media menu at preparedfoods.com, and you'll find tons of articles on flavor fusion and more videos, podcasts, articles, resources of value for today's food and beverage product developers. Until next time.